Hello and welcome to this video lecture, Chapter 9, on risk planning. The agenda for today is two things. First of all, let's look at what can go wrong during the project. And secondly, how can the risks be managed? So as a review, the project life cycle, we are in the planning phase. So to this point, you have progressed through the initiating phase as well as different aspects of planning, such as stakeholder scope, schedule, budget, project team, and quality. So for today, we're going to further our planning awareness, and we're going to start looking at risks. What can possibly go wrong during a project? So let us proceed. There are really two main questions that we ask ourselves. First of all, what can go wrong during the project? And believe me, on projects, many things can go wrong, and sometimes whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And so that to when you ask that question, the output is to create something called the risk list, which is a list of the different risks that may occur during the project. The second part is how can these risks that we've identified be managed? And our output is to create the risk response plan. So, what can go wrong during the project? The first step is to consider everything that could possibly go wrong. Bear in mind that risks have not occurred yet. They are in the future. If they're occurring right now, they're issues, they're problems that are in process at the moment. Risks are in the future. You may identify them through discussions with various stakeholders. You can look at the project scope and you can research into previous projects. So, an all-in approach is good. It isn't just doesn't have to be things that just you think about. You can talk to anyone and everyone about what could possibly go wrong. And there's really then two main things that you want to think about um, and analyze when you've identified a risk. Uh, and that is, first of all, how likely is it that this risk will occur? Is it, very unlikely? Is it 1 in 1,000? Or is it fairly likely? Is there like a 50% chance that it could occur? That's the kind of thing that you want to quantify, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. If it does occur, the second aspect or the second assessment is that if it does occur, what will be the impact on the project? Is it a minor annoyance or is it a catastrophic problem? And those are things that we need to think about once we've identified each risk. Now, in terms of describing the probability and the impact, this is something that we want to put some language around it so that we can be consistent. Because many times the impact may be described what is called qualitatively. That is high, medium, and low. For example, is an example of using qualitative language in order to describe a risk. They may also be described quantitatively. For example, we can say that the probability is, for example, 10%, which is quantitative, or the impact is it may cost us $10,000 in terms of a penalty or cost. That is a quantitative impact. Now, in terms of the two, qualitative are generally easier to do because they're less precise. The downside of them is they are less precise. Is that what does high mean? What does medium mean? Quantitative, the advantage is that they are precise. 10% is 10%. $10,000 is $10,000. We can measure that and we understand what that is. The problem is that it's hard to be accurate, to be that definitive on something that is in the future and is very difficult to predict like that. So this course takes an approach of combining the two aspects, where we combine both quantitative and qualitative when we do the assessment. And for this, I direct you to read the section in the textbook from page 106 to particularly page 108, where it describes this process of taking a qualitative description. For example, for probability, we say that the probability can be described as very likely, likely, or unlikely. So take a qualitative description and then convert that into a factor. For example, as indicated here, an unlikely probability. If we say something is unlikely, through the table on page 108, it's assigned a factor of 0.2, while a likely probability is assigned a factor of 0.8. And this is a system that's been set up in terms of, you can see that 0.2 is less than 0.8, which is unlikely is less than likely. So it's a process that we're setting up, a system. Similarly, there is an impact table on page 108 where the different impact descriptions are critical, severe, moderate, and low. Those are the 4 different choices, and each one of them get an impact factor assigned to them. For example, a low impact is assigned an impact factor of 2, while a critical impact is assigned an impact factor of 10. And again, if you look at the table on page 108, you'll see this as to why those numbers are being selected. So again, see the probability table and impact table in the textbook for a complete description. And then once that's done, a risk score may be calculated. So we're going to take the probability and the impact and multiply them together. So for example, if we have an unlikely probability and a critical impact, we take 0.2, which was taken from the table on page 108, and multiply it by 10, which is again taken from the impact table on page 108, and that's equal to 2. That gives us a score of 2. And then what we can do is, you might say, well, what's 2? 2 is a relative number that can then be ranked against other scores of other risks. Now, at this point, we are going to divert now to the case study update in the textbook. So please pause this video and turn to page 109 in your textbook and read the case study. Once you've done, come on back to this video and continue on. Okay, so we're back, and I assume that you've read the case study update. So now what we've seen is now the creating of the risk list. That's what was happening in that video. So together with her project team, Sophie created a list of 10 potential risks. Now, it doesn't have to be 10. It may be, on some projects it's 5, and others it might be 50. So it's an exhaustive list of the things that can be thought of. And then what happens is that, using the probability and impact tables and the assessment by Sophie and her team, a risk score is created for each risk based on the estimation of probability, the estimation of impact, looking at the different factors and calculating the risk score. The assessed risks are then documented from the highest risk, so that whatever has the highest risk score, to the lowest risk, which is the lowest risk score. And that's where the risk scores become important, is it allows us to prioritize them from our biggest risks to our lowest risks. And if we look at the resulting table, here's what resulted, is that the highest risk identified was actually number 8 on the whiteboard of the case study. Risk number 8 was the promotional video's language translations are incorrect. Notice the description is a little bit more broad. Incorrect translation of the video to French and Spanish results in customer complaints and negative publicity. And the reason why it's the highest score is that the probability factor was 0.8, which is very high. It's very likely. And the impact factor they indicated was severe. That gave a risk score of 6.4, which is the highest one. You can see on this page, it's the highest one so far. So you can see that we're ranking them from highest to lowest. Now notice the very left column, that risk number, and this can be confusing. A lot of times student thinks that they should reorder that number column should be equal to 1 because it's the highest risk. And remember that is just a unique identifier for the risk. It's like a student number. The student number that you have doesn't change at all throughout your time, say here at the college. The other is the same is true of this risk number, is that regardless of how high the probability is, that one about translations is risk number 8. So you should not see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that left column. That'd be very coincidental. You can then see the rest of the list is here. And so we have our list of risks. We now go on to the second point, which how can the risks be managed? And so let's start to look at that. In order to address risks before they occur, certain actions may be taken. They're called risk response strategies, and there's 4 types. There's acceptance. That means we will accept whatever happens. There's mitigation, which is we will look into things, we will make changes to our plans in order to hopefully reduce the probability or reduce the impact. There's risk avoidance, which is to completely eliminate the risk by not doing whatever it is that is causing that risk to be present. And risk transfer, which is to transfer the risk to another body or another organization and so on. That's usually through the use of insurance or waivers. Those are the main tools of risk transfer. But it's really important to understand the difference between these 4, and I'd really encourage you to read the textbook carefully in this regard. Any risk that remains after performing the risk response strategy, because in many cases, except for avoidance, there's a little bit of risk left. Often there's some risk left. That's called residual risk. And the action to be taken, if the risk does actually occur, in spite of everything we may do, it still may occur. So the actions to be taken that are planned in advance is called the contingency plan. So again, you should stop the video and turn to the second case study that is in the textbook on page 114 and read the case study update, creating the risk response plan, and then come on back here. Okay, so here we're back, and here is the result of the risk response planning that was done. We can see that for each risk, now each risk in the risk list should be present in the same order. So risk number 8 is first, and we can see that they took an approach of avoid. Because this risk was so high, they decided to avoid this risk through not translating it to at this in this particular implementation of DecoCam, there will be no translations. Therefore, they can't be incorrect. That's in the use of avoid. Written materials contain errors. Well, that can be mitigated. It can't be avoided. There's nothing you can do to completely avoid that, but you can mitigate it through strict attention to the quality processes throughout the project. And then we can see the contingency plan. If the risk does happen, if there are errors, what do we do? Well, the printed materials will be recalled and reproduced. The electronic material will be immediately corrected. The plan is invoked when the error is reported. That's when the contingency plan kicks in. So this is done for each risk. We have a risk response. We describe the risk response, and then we say, what is it we do if it occurs? The only time you don't need a contingency plan is if you have truly avoided the risk. Then it cannot occur. Now, the 2 things that you should really focus on, really read intently in the textbook, are the different risk response strategies. Make sure that you understand avoid, mitigate, accept, and transfer. And the other is make sure you really understand the difference between risk response and contingency plan. Okay, those are key things that are often misunderstood. And there's the end of the risk response plan. And again, the 3rd page. those are the references, and thank you for watching this video.